When you're late diagnosed with ADHD, you start to realize just how much you were expected to figure out on your own. No explanations, no accommodations, just pressure to keep up. You were set up to fail. Not because you weren't smart or hardworking, but because everyone assumed that would be enough. So you managed, you got by, and they stopped. Looking, by the time things fell apart, most people didn't see a crisis. They saw stress, disorganization, maybe burnout. From the outside, it still looked manageable, like something anyone with enough discipline should be able to handle. And that's the problem, because once you're seen as capable, people no longer see your struggles and they stop offering support. No one gave you an alternative, just expectations to keep being the person they assumed you were and who you thought you had to become. But when the life you built on that expectation stops working, it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It means you were never given the tools to build it sustainably. So today we're talking about what really happens when you've been set up to fail and what you can do when the life you work so hard to hold together starts falling apart. Now, to understand how it got this hard, you have to go back, because the truth is you always knew you were different, not in a dramatic way, but you were always a little out of sync, a little behind, a little too much. But you assumed that was normal because everyone
has something right, and part of why it didn't feel urgent was because childhood made it easier to manage, or at least easier to hide. As a kid, the world was smaller, more structured. There were adults making decisions, and life had fewer moving parts. Even when you struggled, the consequences weren't catastrophic. You fell, but nothing broke, and you weren't thriving, but you didn't know you were already behind. It just felt like being quirky or inconsistent, something you grow out of if you just kept trying. But then suddenly the structure fell away. Adulthood doesn't come with scaffolding, no more built-in routines, no one monitoring your well-being, just mounting responsibilities in a quiet expectation to manage them on your own. So you did what you always did: you pushed harder, masked better, and held it together by stretching yourself beyond your limits until you couldn't. Everything just stops. Not a slow unraveling, not something you can just push through. Your body, your brain, your willpower is just done, and after that you can't go back to just trying harder, not just because you won't, but because now you know where that road leads, and you can't afford to end up there again. You realize that this was never about effort. It wasn't that you didn't try hard enough, it's that you were trying to live a life that was never built with your brain in mind. You didn't know you had a disability. You didn't know there were ways to work with your brain instead of constantly fighting it. So you built your life around big adult decisions: a hard one, career, a home you worked for, a relationship you nurtured, maybe you had children, and all of it was built on the belief that if you just kept pushing, you'd eventually catch up. No one told you that support wasn't optional, that even a life you fought hard for could fall apart without the right foundation. You kept going, assuming it would get easier once you finally caught up, but the pressure kept building and the tools you needed never came. No one warns you how hard it is to let go of who you thought you had to be, even if that version wasn't sustainable, even if it was costing you more than you could give, because while you were living without support, you were trying to be someone who is strong, reliable, and ambitious, and you still can be, but it might not look like what you thought it would. This isn't just burnout, it's an identity crisis rooted in years of trying to become someone the world would accept. So you rebuild, not to start over, but to return to the version of you that was always there, buried underneath everything you were told you had to be. Support isn't failure, it's not a last resort, it's what you were always supposed to have, even if no one ever offered it. Sometimes support looks like therapy or medication or community. Sometimes it looks like choosing a job that respects your pace, or asking your partner to take on more, or being honest with your children and saying, you know what, I'm having a hard day, but I'm still
here with you. Letting go of the impossible isn't giving up. It's finally understanding why it was impossible and using that information to choose differently. The expectations were never realistic. They only felt mandatory because no one showed you another way. So start small. Reconsider one assumption. Change one habit that's hurting you. Ask for one thing that could help. It is the end of who you were becoming, the version of you who ran on pressure and kept pushing. Because stopping never felt like an option, but letting go of that version doesn't mean disappearing. It means making space for a life that doesn't demand constant self. betrayal for a self that doesn't rely on masking to be accepted, for rest, for rhythm, and for actual support. Not because you gave up, but because you finally gave yourself what was missing: structure, understanding, and enough room to exist as you are. Thank you so much for joining me today.